Alright, this is how I'm going to show you guys how I want you to do a proper brake inspection. We're not really following any particular worksheets, but the basic purpose is to measure the brake pad thickness, to measure the rotor thickness, to measure the rotor run out, and determine what we need to do. And so the brake pad thickness is pretty easy. We're going to start with these gauges here. And we're going to need our fancy light, because if you can't see, you can't read. If you can't read, I can't help you. So first thing, when we're trying to measure that outboard pad, there's a couple different techniques. I prefer to just kind of go like right along the rotor here. And we're kind of going right up to the pad. So can you see that? That brake pad thickness is just about exactly 10 millimeters. And so this isn't an extremely precise measurement, but I'd say that's about 10 millimeters. And then the other one, which may provide even better, we'll get from back here through the inspection hole. And get the light in the right spot. And you may even be able to get the camera right in there so you're looking straight at it. So line it up a little bit straighter. Reach your hand in further. So it's a tough one to get, but we are going to get it, I can assure you. So right there where you see the inspection, we're basically trying to line it up with the brake lining. And we've got maybe just a hair over 10. It's very tough to get the lighting right, but you can see it right there. So we're just trying to fit this measurement tool on the brake pad lining. So I'm going to say that one is probably just a hair over 10 because I'm using the 10 millimeter measurement tool. So just there's a little bit of gap there. So if you look at these tools really quick, if you go ahead and you insert the 10 and it's fairly close, basically the lining of the brake pad's about that thick. If it was thinner, it wouldn't fit. We'd drop it down to maybe an 8 or 6, 5, or a 4. So logically, if it's 12 millimeters, 10 millimeters, 8 millimeters, we're just going to note down 8 millimeters. That's good. If we get into the more like 6 or 5 millimeters, we're going to say, hey, you need to start planning on some brake work. If we're at 4, that's kind of like where it's fair to start saying, hey, you're going to need some brake work, but you could do it now too. If we're at 3 millimeters, we consider that a now. If we're at 2, we consider that a now and kind of urgent, because you can't really predict the last 2 millimeters very well because a lot of things can happen, and also the lining can actually detach from the metal as it gets that thin because it starts to get into the adhesive. So that's your basic brake pad measurement, and ultimately what's really relevant is the lowest one. So if you have uneven wear, if you have a 10 and an 8, the 8 is the important part. Now from there, come on over here. The next step, we need to get some specifications. So we got specifications for this vehicle. This is going to be for the rotor in particular. And it does actually talk about the brake pad. If you look at how Toyota wants you to measure the brakes, this makes sense as long as you have no concept of time and no urgency. If you try to do a brake inspection at your job and you remove the brake pad and measure it with a ruler, that car is going to be late and you are going to be in trouble and someone is going to laugh at you. So don't do it like that, even though the picture says it. And so they're saying new is like 11 millimeters. So if we wanted to right now, we could say, well, if new is 11 and we're at 10, we could probably say, hey, that's probably like 90+%. So we'd say, you got about 90% brake life remaining if you wanted to convert it into a percentage for them. So that makes sense for the brake pads. Now regarding the rotors, you can see we need to measure the rotor thickness here. The standard thickness, and we're going to do this in inches because this is America, and I speak American. Inches, new, standard is new, is 1.1 inches, but we like to do 3 digits, right? So we're going to do 1.100. That would be brand new. Now note, the minimum is 0.984. So when you go to measure these rotors, there's always a possibility it has some thickness variation in different points. So we're going to do several quick measurements at 4 different points. We can use a couple different tools. The first tool being a caliper. The only slight negative of a caliper, there's very little clearance right here. So if there's a lip on the edge of the rotor, it could throw your caliper measurement off. So you could use it, but there's a chance to be wrong. And also, this is digital, so if you can't read this, you got bigger problems. So we're not really going to cover how to use this one. We're going to use the micrometer, which is more accurate, a little bit more technical, but the caliper is fast when possible. So we take this micrometer, make way, we're coming over here, we're going to do some work. And what I'm just basically going to do is get an idea. You know, if I'm going to do 4 measurements, I'm going to say, like, we'll do one here, one here, one here, one here. And there's good access right here, so I'm going to go ahead with that measurement. I'm going to open it up far enough, and I'm going to go ahead and this is a 1 to 2 inch micrometer. So because it's a standard thickness of over an inch but under 2, I think this will be about right. But there's a chance that this may be too small, and sure enough it is. So I'm off. I'm below 0 here. So we can't actually do a ton with this one. So I'll try that one more time. And you know, we will. No, we'll be all right. So this is 1 point something then. That's good. So I'm going to go ahead to this point. Now note while I use this, you know, this isn't really a video on how to read the micrometer, but it's more of technique. I'm kind of moving this micrometer around. I'm clicking the ratchet part. I can't over tighten it with the ratchet, but I'm just making sure I really got the measurement I want. And then at this point, the best way is to read it in place. You could also lock it and try to pull it off, but in this case there's a slight lip right there, but this one is just barely gonna sneak. So best is to measure it in place. But here's our measurement. We've got, it's a 1 to 2 inch mic, so we've got a 1 point, and that number is almost a 1. It's just a hair under the 1. So my measurement on this one is a 1.098. So if you want to learn how to read the micrometer, that's a different video. But if I've got a 1.098 there, what I could do is go ahead and spin my roughly 90 degrees. I'll measure at another point. I may even just do a quick reference to see if it's roughly the same number. I'm gonna try to do the same thing. You know, I'm wiggling it, I'm trying to turn it, and I've got the exact same number. I'm on the exact same point. I spin it again. So now we'll be at about 180 out. Same number. Another 90. You could measure it as many times as you want, but the real important thing is that you measure it in several spots. You know, in this case we'll go with about 4. I've got the same number, and once again that number was a 1.098. So let's go over to our specs here. And you know, we were doing some notes before. So 1.100 is our standard, and we got a 1.098. So that's like practically brand new. What I can interpret from this is it's never been machined before. It may have had minimal wear because the brake pad's riding on the surface, but if I've got a 1.098 and my minimum is 0.984, we could take our existing number 1.098 minus the minimum 0.984, and we could determine how much life is left. So you could do this a couple different ways. You could do it the long way. 8 minus 4 is going to be 4. 9 minus 8 is 1. 0 minus 9. Right, so it would be like 10 minus 9 would be 1. It'd be 0. It'd be 0.114. So let's draw that back up here. We've got basically a 0.114 inches. So what I call that is 114 thousandths. I could tell you if we were to, you know, on a standard brake inspection, it's unlikely we'd measure rotor thickness, but the reason we're doing it during this exercise is so that if we're going to sell brakes, we need to know, are we selling brake pads and new rotors? Are we selling brake pads and rotor resurface? So check this number out, 114 thousandths if we were to resurface a rotor, we may take roughly 10 thousandths each cut. We could cut this over 10, we could do over 10 passes. We've got plenty of room. We've got 114 thousandths to work with. If we were trying to sell a brake job, we know that this could be resurfaced. So that just gives us a good measurement. Now, if we were below the minimum of 0.984, we would have to junk it. We'd say, hey, you need new rotors. But again, don't get confused. On a typical MPI, you're probably not going to measure rotors, really. But if you're going to sell brakes, you need to measure rotors so we can tell the customer, you're going to need new rotors, you're going to be able to resurface them. Now, let's say we had a number, like there's the minimum, right, 984. Let's say we had a number like 0.992, right, 0.992. That would leave us, that'd be 6, 7, 8. That would leave us 8 thousandths of an inch, because that same measurement, right, 992 minus 984. That's not going to be enough to resurface it. So we'd have to predict, hey, you know what? We're going to sell you brakes, but of course we're not selling you brakes at 10 millimeters, okay, people? If it's 2 millimeters and you want to sell them brakes, say, hey, you need brakes, but you're going to need brake pads and new rotors, right? Now, another note is if we were to measure those rotors at the 4 points right here, 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 and here, and there was a difference from one to the other, that's known as thickness variation. And basically, any real thickness variation is a no-go. So only one more measurement we have to do on these rotors, and it's called runout. And so if you just go right here, we're going to check the runout measurement. Here's the tool. We've got the dial indicator, and we're going to use the vice grips particularly, and the snake. And if you note on that back side here, we've got again, this car is Japanese, right? So we could talk millimeters, but I don't like it. So we've got a maximum runout of 0.0019. Okay, 9, that's nonsense. Let's just round that up. 0.002. It's very standard. If you have a maximum of 2 thousandths runout, that's almost universal for any Toyota. So 2 thousandths maximum runout. I'll show you how we measure that. We're going to go over here. We already have this set up. We need to put the lug nuts on. We need to have the lug nuts snugged up, because if this rotor is able to rock around, it's going to give us an inadequate or an inaccurate measurement. And so the next step, I'm going to trust you more than I trust that lift arm. The next step, we're going to want to get the vice grips. There's a couple places you could sometimes go here. Sometimes you can go here. I'd say here may be arguably more accurate, but it kind of depends on the specifics. So in this case, I'm actually going to go to right here. It's a little bit of a funny measurement to perform, but I'm clipping the vice grips so they're tight. They're not going to move. The next step, I'm going to take the snake of the dial indicator, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to thread that in here, right into that spot. I'm going to pass my light off. Somebody could be the light person if we need it. If the lighting's good, we don't need it. If we do, we
go.
Boom, it's lit up. So we're going to go ahead and I snug this right here. I'm going to get the snake in about the position I think it should be. Okay, and then right here it's got a lot of slack. I need to take that slack off. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to tighten this right here. And what I just tightened is starting to take the slack out. I'm going to want it right about here, I would say. And then when I think I got it pretty close, I'm going to lock this little lever. Okay, so you can see it's hanging there. The next step I need to do, we grab the dial indicator. The dial indicator is going to be slid in like this, right here. And then, I'm going to have it in a spot that kind of is like roughly centered. Now the next step, I'm going to re-loosen this little red lever. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to actually touch it to the rotor. I'm going to touch it to the rotor, and then I'm going to have it go in a little, so that it's not just skipping across the surface. Then I'm going to re-snug the red lever right here. And now it should stay roughly still. Now at this point, depending on if you like to zero it or not, you can. And now I'm going to have it right there at just about zero. Now let's switch spots so you can see pretty well. So we've got it zeroed, at least from the perspective I had. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it, and we're going to watch that needle. Now that needle, I actually bumped it. That was my fault, and that's one thing to watch out for. So I got to keep my fingers out of there. You know, the snake, you can bump the snake and it'll move, and if it does, your measurement's trash. So I'm going to keep my hands well out of the way now. Now as I move it, I just re-zeroed it. We're going to notice it has moved minimally. Touch it again. Just a little bit. Tell you what we're going to do. We're going to work smarter, not harder. You go to the other side, turn the other wheel. So that way my hands aren't in here because they're tending to hit that thing. Come on, you got the juice. So you could see that. Has it moved off of zero?
No,
I mean,
sir.
it's off of zero now, but it's not really moving. So I'm going to reset it to zero. Go ahead again. I mean, you may see a little flutter. I associate the flutter with the rusty surface. So this has 0 thousandths run out. What that means is this rotor right here has no, you could say, warpage. This wouldn't have a pulsation. The reason that we would measure this is to determine if it has a pulsation or if it needs to be resurfaced. So you keep looking at this. This will make sense. But let me break it down from a technical and a flat rate perspective. First things first, if you bring every car in and you do all these measurements, you're going to be upside down in time. You're going to spend too much time. So what we really do as technicians, we're going to get in the vehicle, we're going to drive it. If we drive it on a road test and it pulsates, we know it has run out. Make sense? Run out is the pulsation, it's the warpage. The question is it this rotor or that rotor or both of them, or is it in the rear? So if you drive a car for pulsation, that's its complaint. You need to determine, is it front or rear? Because guess what? You're not going to cut one rotor, you're going to cut two. If you're going to resurface, aka cut, the front rotors, who cares if it's the left or the right? You're cutting them both, and the lathe is going to fix them both. But if the pulsation is in the rear, and you cut the front, and it's not fixed, you're fired. It's your fault. Make sense? So to the untrained technician, this is a good tool. You can determine, is it front, is it rear, whatever. But to the trained technician, we're going to road test it. If the steering wheel's shaking, I'm pretty much after the front. If my butt is shaking, if the seat is shaking my butt, I'm going to probably say it's the rear. If I'm unsure, I can do this. Some cars you can cheat with the parking brake, but it depends on what the parking brake applies. Sometimes the parking brake applies a different set of brake shoes, so it doesn't help you. So this is a good, this is really how you measure run out, but it's not very commonly done because if we're going to sell new pads, we're going to resurface the rotors. We're going to fix any run out if there ever was any, so why measure it? If we're bringing a car in for a complaint of a brake pulsation, we're going to drive it, we're going to have experience, we're going to know if it's front or rear based on the road test, so you wouldn't really typically measure it. But if you do need to measure it for whatever reason, now you know how to measure it. Any questions? Who remembers the maximum run out?
0.002.
2 thousandths, and we have nothing, so this one is excellent. Now, if you resurface the rotors off car lathe, put them back on, you could verify that they're not having run out with this, but with the on-car Pro Cut, it measures run out internally. We don't really need to verify. We could trust it. Make sense? Any other questions? Wrap it up.